Hello everybody, welcome back to Plains, Georgia. Today we're going to check out the boyhood home and farm of President Jimmy Carter. Now, he did not come from big wealthy beginnings. He grew up in a very rural farm just behind me. So today we're going to check out his boyhood home. We're going to go through it and check out some of the property and what things look like and get a kind of a feel for how Jimmy Carter grew up. So let's go take a look. Here's some of the property out here. Very peaceful out here. Plains, obviously a very small town, but it has a lot of charm and very, very nice people. But this was the home of James and Lillian Carter, and this is where Jimmy Carter grew up. Now, Jimmy Carter was actually not born in this home. I believe he was the first president to actually be born in a hospital. He was born across town. His mother Lillian worked there. This is kind of an interesting little tidbit here. This was the old tennis court that young Jimmy used. Show you this here. It says, President Carter's lifelong love of tennis began with his frequent fierce contests with his father on this Georgia clay court. There it is. Very humble beginnings. And even with all of his success, he never left Plains. He lived here his entire life. He may have done a lot of traveling around the world, but he always found his way back to Plains. And he never forgot where he came from. But this right here is the home that he grew up in. So let's check it out. This is the Earl and Lillian Carter home. James Earl Carter Sr. and his family moved into this middle-class rural dwelling as its second owners in 1928, 6 years after the home had been built. Heating was accomplished by fireplaces and wood stoves. Initially, there was no running water and electricity was unavailable until 1938. Earl Carter sold the farm to T.R. Downer in 1949. The Downer family owned the property until 1994, when the National Park Service purchased it. The home is restored to its 1930s appearance before it had electricity. Earl and Lillian Carter and their 4 children, Jimmy, Gloria, Ruth, and Billy, lived here. They would have had very peaceful days here. It's kind of hard to imagine a time before people had TV sets, before everybody had a cell phone, computer. Simple living. This was the living room. It said, coming in this room from school each day, the children first stopped by the black desk, which they nicknamed Mother. Black desk is over here. It says their mother's nursing career kept her frequently away from home. She would write down chores for the children and leave their to-do list on the desk. The family gathered in this room following the evening meal. Their chores would have been right here, kind of like this. Jimmy had to bring in firewood, fill the water basin, and clean out the fireplace ashes. This is Gloria and Ruth's bedroom. It says Jimmy's 2 sisters shared this bedroom. Now, this would have been a pretty nice home back in the day. This is Jimmy Carter's mother and father's room. Those beds didn't look very comfortable, did they? And then a little bit of a luxury at the time. Here is the bathroom. The bucket above the shower. Sink. It says, finally getting an indoor bathroom was a big event in the Carter family. No one complained about bathing in the cold shower with water coming directly from the tank on the windmill. Right up there. It said an even greater blessing was not having to walk outside and across the yard to go to the outhouse. This would have been a tremendous luxury. Dining room over here. It says the formal eating area was used for Sunday dinners, holidays, and when there was company. The closets were filled with toys, books, linens, and dishes. Sometimes the children would lay their school books on the table and use this room for doing their homework. This was the breakfast room. Pretty good sized room for back in the day. Here's the old telephone. And the kitchen. It said most of the food in this home was produced in the Carter's fields, the garden, pasture, and yard. Cooking and canning using the wood cook stove made meal preparation an extensive process. But imagine how healthy you'd be if you did that today. Here was Jimmy's bedroom. Now, I did hear them say on a tour ahead of me that they believe that this is the original comforter that belonged to Jimmy Carter as a kid. I'm not sure what else in here is original. It says, like most boys, Jimmy enjoyed spending time outdoors. His bedroom, however, was a place where he kept many of his collected treasures. Postcards, letters, and souvenirs sent to him by his uncle Tom Gordy, who was in the Navy, sparked dreams in faraway places. Lillian Carter instilled a love of reading in her children, which is evident by the books in her son's room and throughout the house. The boyhood bedroom of a future president. Here we go out to the front porch. And a time before dishwashers and all the washing machines and everything that we have come to get used to today. Things were done very manual back then. Some of the tools from the day. Now, young Jimmy was instilled with a pretty good work ethic by his family, especially his father. And it's a work ethic that helped, he went through the Navy. He became a governor. He became president of the United States. He authored over 20 books. Habitat for Humanity. I mean, the things that he did go on and on and on. Charitable foundations. He was also a pretty talented artist that he didn't realize until later in life, but he did a lot of paintings, and all the money from the sales of those paintings, some of them were selling up for $200,000-$300,000, and all that money would go to charity. Here's some animals. Now, working the farm, they'd have to feed the animals, they'd have to take care of the animals, they'd have to take care of the land. It was a lot of work, but that was kind of how things worked back then. It's easy to say that kids today have it easy. Well, hi there. Would you like to give an interview? What is it like living on the Jimmy Carter Boyhood farm? Good stuff. Now, if they hadn't had a toilet inside, this is what they would have had to do. And while in Georgia it might not be bad to go outside and use an outhouse, other presidents like Lincoln's house in Springfield, Illinois, having to go back outside and do your business and go through the freezing cold, harsh winters in other parts of the country would have been just absolutely horrible to do. But if you can rewind time roughly 100 years, I can't imagine things around here would have looked too much different. There's gardens for crops in there. Have a scarecrow out. Chicken coop. You know, back then everything would be produced on farm. They'd collect eggs. If they wanted a farm fresh breakfast, they meant it. It came from the farm. And they had a store on site here where they could sell some of their crops, fruits and vegetables. It's pretty incredible. So this is what a general store would have looked like back then. Much different than what you see today. You know, freezer sections full of preserved garbage. This is how they did it. They would smoke their meats and hang them from the ceiling. And I bet those were good. Very limited stuff, some canned goods, fresh fruits, vegetables, Coca-Cola, big thing down here in Georgia, and peanuts. One of the other things that made Plains famous. They'd have soaps and other medicines, things like that, but very limited, the things that you could get in a store. Old cash register. $1.74, that could have bought you quite a bit back then. Now I should note one of the other interesting things is if you think about all the things that Jimmy Carter did during his lifetime, going to the White House, he traveled the world, he helped eradicate diseases in third world countries, but he always came back here to Plains. And he could have lived anywhere he wanted to in the world. He could have afforded to live pretty much anywhere he wanted in the world, but he chose to live a simple life. He and Rosalind, they got their house here in the 1960s, and they lived there until their death. One house, and it's a nice house by any common standards today, but most presidents have had massive houses. Most presidents have had major book deals, things like that, and they've made a lot of money, and they kind of live the life. Jimmy Carter didn't believe in that. He was a country boy, and he lived his life the way that he was brought up. There's some of the other gardens. You have tomatoes and peppers. A little bit of everything in here. Corn. Now, I'd really like to know in the comments, first off, who has been to Plains and come to check out these sites? And second off, who was raised on a farm? I'd love to hear a little bit more about what it was like, especially back in the old days. Now, I'm not entirely sure what all of these buildings would have been used for. Looks like this one was a pump shed. It said this small but important building was reconstructed. Part of the time the Carters kept a pump here driven by a small gasoline motor. It was used to pump water for all the livestock, which was a tremendous job. Water was drawn by hand during the earlier years of Jimmy's life. That would not have been easy either. Well, this is pretty awesome. The harness shed. It says this original farm structure was where 1 or 2 farm wagons, sometimes a buggy, and all the leather and canvas for about 20 mules and horses were kept. This is how they would plow the fields. Catch the mules. It says here at the barn the day started early. All the workers arose each morning at 4 a.m., wakened by the ringing of a large farm bell. We would go to the barn and catch the mules by lantern light, put plow stocks, seed, fertilizer, and other supplies on the wagon, and drive out to the field where we would begin working that day, and wait for it to be light enough to cultivate. And here would be the mule barn. Yeah, people were definitely a lot tougher in this generation. There's a lot of people I know today that wouldn't be able to last 20 minutes doing this kind of work. But you have to really admire people that grow up learning what hard work really is. That will just about do it for the Jimmy Carter Boyhood Home and Farm. Hopefully you learned a little bit and can kind of put a mental picture with what things would have been like for him as a kid and what his life would have looked like early on. But that's pretty much all there is for today. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video. Take care, everybody.